In this hotel just behind me, Secretary of State John Kerry announced that after hours of talks, the players have taken one step back from the brink.
I'm pleased to say that as a result, today in Munich, we believe we have made progress on both the humanitarian front and the cessation of hostilities front. And these two fronts, this progress, has the potential, fully implemented, fully followed through on, to be able to change the daily lives of the Syrian people.
And today, the Deputy United Nations Secretary General tells me that while this is not a breakthrough, it is one step forward. And they will know within a week whether there's enough progress on these fronts to be able to reconvene the stalled Geneva political talks. And today, I spoke with one of the key players who backs the Syrian opposition, Saudi Arabian Foreign Minister Adel Al-Jubeir, in this television exclusive. Foreign Minister, welcome to the program.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, has said that they want to or are prepared to introduce ground troops into Syria. Is that so? Are you on the brink of or prepared to or planning to send ground troops to Syria?
Yes. What we said is that if the international coalition against Daesh, which we are a part of and have been since the very beginning, decides that it will introduce ground troops to Syria in addition to the current air campaign, we have said that the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia is prepared to contribute special forces to this effort.
But that's conditional. So is it you want the United States to be involved on the ground? Are you looking for a US-led coalition on the ground?
Absolutely, yes. We are saying we will participate within the US-led coalition. Should this coalition decide to send ground troops into Syria, or that we were prepared to send special forces with those troops.
Do you think that's at all likely? In all the conversations you've had, there have been long conversations overnight. You've been speaking to the Russian foreign minister. Do you think it's likely that that's going to happen?
I can't tell you what will happen and what will not happen. I can tell you that there's some serious discussion going on with regards to looking at a ground component in Syria, because there has to be a possibility of taking and holding ground that one cannot do from the air.
I wonder what you make of what the Russian Prime Minister, Dmitry Medvedev, said, and I don't know whether Sergei Lavrov, the foreign minister, repeated it, that if Saudi Arabia or other Gulf nations introduce troops into Syria, there will be a new world war in Syria.
I believe that's an exaggeration. The international coalition was operating in Syria since September of 2014. The Russians entered in order to fight Daesh, ISIS. Russia entered into Syria this fall in order to support Bashar al-Assad.
What is your assessment of the strength of Bashar Assad now, given the 3.5 months of Russian airstrikes that have supported him?
I believe Bashar al-Assad is weak, and I believe Bashar al-Assad is finished, and I believe Bashar al-Assad has no future in Syria. Bashar al-Assad butchered, massacred and killed his people, men, women and children, and his military couldn't save him. So he prevailed upon the Iranians to come and support him, who sent their Quds forces and their revolutionary guards, and they in turn couldn't save him. So Iran and Bashar al-Assad mobilized Hezbollah, Shia militias from Iraq, Pakistan, Afghanistan, and they in turn couldn't save him. And now we have Russia going into Syria in support of Bashar al-Assad, and they will not be able to save him. A man who's responsible for the murder of 300,000 plus people, the displacement of 12 million people, the destruction of a country, is a man with absolutely no future in this country.
And yet, you've all been sitting around a table for hours, and the word that has come out is that there is a potential de-escalation underway, there's a potential for humanitarian aid and a lifting of the sieges. Do you think that's serious? Do you think that that is likely to happen? And do you think, in that case, the political talks, the Geneva process, will get underway again, as the UN wants, later this month?
We have always said there are two ways to resolve Syria, and they both involve the removal of Bashar al-Assad. One way is by way of a political process, through the Vienna process, based on the Geneva I principles, where we have established an interim governing council that takes power away from Bashar al-Assad and then manages the affairs of the country, writes a constitution, holds elections, and moves Syria towards a new future without any role for Bashar al-Assad. That would be the preferable way, because it would spare lives and it could be done more efficiently. This is what we're trying to do in the talks that we had yesterday. The other alternative, should this first alternative fail, is by force. Bashar al-Assad will leave, have no doubt about it. He will either leave by a political process or he will be removed by force. The Syrian people will not accept him being in power.
How do you, though, envision removing him by force? Because, as you've said, Saudi Arabia, would not engage on the ground unless it was led by the United States. The United States doesn't seem at all in a position to change its policy of intervening, or rather of non-intervention. And there are opposition forces who I'm sure you hear from who believe that support of the US is fading for them, that maybe they're going to be hung out to dry. And as we see, Bashar Assad's forces are making gains around Aleppo.
I believe that currently we're trying to explore the possibility of bringing about a transition in Syria through a political process, where the agreement that was made yesterday was a very important one. It starts with an immediate supply of humanitarian assistance to the affected areas of Syria within the next day or two, and then it calls for a cessation of hostilities, essentially a pause, so that we can test the intentions of the Syrian regime and its allies. We will push as much as we can to ensure that the political process works, but if it doesn't work, it will be because of the obstinance of the Syrian regime and that of its allies. And should that prove to be the case, then it becomes clear that there is no option to removing Bashar al-Assad except by force.
The conflict or the adversarial relationship between Iran and Saudi Arabia has, many people said, really poisoned the atmosphere around the region, that it makes everything that much more difficult. I'd wonder if you could respond to an interview, or at least part of an interview I did with your Iranian counterpart, Javad Zarif. Take a listen.
We do not have a fight to pick with Saudi Arabia. We don't expect, or we're not interested even in pushing Saudi Arabia out of this region, because Saudi Arabia is an important player in this region. Unfortunately, the Saudis have had the illusion that, backed by their Western allies, they could push Iran out of the equation in the region.
I find it comic that the foreign minister of the country that is single-handedly responsible for the mischief in the region for the past 35 years would say this. We have had no hostile intentions towards Iran. We have not tried to exploit Iran's sectarianism. We have not tried to exploit Iran's minorities. We have not assassinated Iranian diplomats or blown up Iranian embassies. We have not smuggled explosives in Iran. We have not planted terrorist cells inside Iran. It's Iran that has established Hezbollah in Lebanon, the world's #1 terrorist organization. It's Iran that is fighting to keep a brutal dictator responsible for the death of 300,000 Syrians and the displacement of 12 million in power. And it is Iran that has mobilized sectarian militias from Iraq, Afghanistan, Pakistan to support this dictator, not Saudi Arabia.
And yet you are around the table in the support group as the principals around the table. Can you compartmentalize that and move this process forward? Or how does that, what you've just said, play out around the table?
We have always said that we would like to have good relations with Iran. Iran is our neighbor. They have been our neighbor for the past 5,000 years and will remain our neighbor for the next 5,000 years. It's a fact of geography. But neighbors have to live with each other based on the principle of good neighborliness and the principle of non-interference in the affairs of others. We have no ill will towards Iran. We have committed no aggression against Iran. We have been on the receiving end of it. So if Iran changes its behavior, acts like a normal country, stops interfering in the affairs of other countries, then yes, it will be a welcome member of the neighborhood and the international community.
Do you think America is leading enough in the solution to the end of the war in Syria?
America is playing a big role in the International Syrian Support Group. The US has been supportive of the Syrian opposition and has worked with a number of countries in order to enhance their capabilities, and the US has played a big role in terms of trying to arrive at the political process.
Big enough?
That is for the Americans to decide, but from my perspective, no country, including Saudi Arabia, can play a big enough role.
Foreign Minister Adel Al-Jubeir, thank you very much indeed for joining me.
You're welcome. It was a pleasure.
Meantime, late this afternoon, in an interview just released, President Bashar Assad tells the AFP that he plans to retake the entire country. And you can see much more of my interview with the Saudi Foreign Minister on the war in Yemen and on the deeply criticized Saudi human rights record inside their own country.